Today, there is a very special guest joining our podcast as none other than one of the great names in the world of fitness, especially up in the Great White North in Canada. Andrew Coates is joining us, a man who is not only a full-time in-person trainer, but also writes for many amazing publications, including the likes of Men's Health, Muscle Nation, and T Nation, as well as a laundry list of other publications. So, Andrew, without further ado, I'm very excited to be able to chat with you today.
Appreciate you having me on, Matthias. Thanks. I'm in between client sessions, so I'm still hip deep in what I love to do most. So thank you.
There's a story that you published not super long ago, but it caught my eye when I first saw it, and I wanted to save it exactly for this moment. And you'll probably remember it as soon as I start describing it. But it was something that I think was very eye-opening about the importance of character in the gym. And I want to just describe to the listener a little bit about this story. So you were talking about the event you were having for Evolve Strength back in October, and somebody having some choice words for not being in agreement with the event. So you talked about how you'd moved to Edmonton
Okay.
17 or going on, I guess, 18 years ago with 8K in credit card debt, two suitcases full of your belongings. You didn't have a car. You bought a beater for less than 2K, would go back and forth to a casino, hide away playing World of Warcraft, and felt extremely overwhelmed when you first started in the fitness industry, as I'm sure, and from my own experience, many personal trainers are. But eventually, over time, you were able to learn and kind of land on your feet. And it's similar to, let's say, Hormozy style, sleeping on the gym floor and doing these crazy things eventually led to finding some success and gaining traction. So the question that I want to ask you is, what was the moment during that initial move to Edmonton that made you realize you were built for this? You were built to overcome challenges that are thrown at you when starting in the fitness industry.
Okay. A couple things. First of all, just to point of clarify, because for anyone listening, the casino thing, that was where I worked. So, and it's important to delineate. There wasn't like there was a gambling problem in there at all. I don't gamble. But so the first job that I got when I moved to Edmonton at the time was working in a casino, dealing blackjack, then poker, then part-time poker manager of the room. So there was no moment. There was no moment where it's like, hey, I can handle this. There just was no other choice. There is you put one foot in front of the other, you make this work. And I think far too many people allow the like to fail or to falter or to quit or to just crumble in the face of pretty normal, difficult life stuff. That story sounds like I'm the product of like insurmountable odds and terrible hardship and all this sort of stuff. And guess what? Everybody has had similar moments in their life, or most people have. And I think most people will look back and we can look back and connect the dots, and it makes for a really great narrative. But there's a survivorship bias in these stories as well, because you also don't hear the tales of the people who struggled and didn't quote make it in this context. I did what I had to do. I found a job. I rode the bus for a while, for 6 months, cold winters, and I did what I had to do because there was no other alternative. I hid away from the world for a while because that is how I dealt with it. And then after a while, I realized that getting back into the gym, which is something I love doing recreationally for myself, and playing nonstop World of Warcraft were incongruent. And I also got fed up with the job after doing that for 3.5 years. So I quit that job, and then I was looking for something else. And the gym that I had been now regularly attending for a few years kept asking me off the gym floor to come be a personal trainer. And I kept saying no because I wasn't interested in that thing until I finally said, okay, well, let's give this a shot. I didn't start out as this passionate, oh my God, I want to help people, early 20 something. I was 32 years old, starting a new career, starting a job, right? Didn't know what I was getting into. I remember end of the first week going, I'm totally overwhelmed. I don't think I can do this. And then I remember the end of week two, I posted something to Facebook that I didn't remember, but the memory on Facebook is, it shows the memory of this. It's like, I see a lot of potential. I'm feeling good about the job. And I kind of laugh looking back in retrospect because again, we connect the dots and go, oh, like this is the map to whatever. There was a lot of head down doing what I had to do. And I think it's probably a product of my generation. I'm Gen X. I'm 46 years old now, born in 78. So there is definitely a cultural difference between that generation and millennials, and especially the younger millennials and the iGens, right? It's people deal in stereotypes and what have you, but younger generation has grown up with more access to the world and social media. So therefore, that younger generation oftentimes is in a bigger rush to make a difference. They absolutely want to make sure that everything they're contributing to the world is making a bigger difference. And I think that's a very noble thing. With that can sometimes come an impatience to put your head down and pay your dues and do things that don't necessarily seem like they have light at the end of the tunnel. There were many junctures throughout all this where I didn't see light at the end of the tunnel. I'm simply doing what I have to do to make it in the world, to survive, to be able to pay my bills, and to, not emotionally crumble along the way. And there were lots of hard days and lots of hard times. And I look back at it and like you mentioned Hormozy, and Hormozy will romanticize. People romanticize the hardest days. Well, part of the romance is the fact that we came out the other side of it okay. So it was formative. And these are things that oftentimes shaped our emotional resilience to this stuff, right? Again, survivorship bias. We don't hear the stories about the people who crumbled. So I just kept putting my head down and I got busier and busier. So very quickly, thankfully, I got busy at this gym. They sold a lot of clients for me. And then I started renewing and getting referrals and generating a lot of floor walk-up business. So within a couple of months, I was one of the trainers who was doing higher numbers of sessions per month. And I consistently did that. And very quickly, within the space of a year, I'm one of the busier trainers in the company. Within a couple of years, I am the top session performing trainer in the company in terms of pure volume of sessions. And then soon after that, I become one of the higher selling trainers. And then year over year for several years being there, I was the number one session performing trainer in the company, right? So there's a difference between dollar sales and sessions performed, but even still, by most metrics, I'm either at the top or one of them. And so, but my focus is still head down in the work, being of service to my clients. I was fulfilled by the work. I really enjoyed it. And along the way, I became very passionate about learning about nutrition, about training. And I went from the person who is doing this job to something like, hey, I really like this. I can see a future in this. And of course, earning potential is growing, growing, growing. And, you're in a commercial gym environment. So I was doing very well, even by the standards of the industry. But obviously, there's limits to that. And I was there for 6 years. There was always drama and difficult stuff within that gym and that organization. Commercial gyms oftentimes have a young-minded and transient type of people working there. There are professionals or people, and I say young-minded. I'm not equating young people to this sort of stuff, but there's oftentimes some young-mindedness, and they don't necessarily take this as a serious job or as their long-term career. Whereas for me, it became very much my career. And so there's conflict over that. There was a lot of sexual harassment in that environment. There was predatory multi-level marketing recruitment. And my integrity stands firmly against that. Problem is a lot of those behaviors were actually in the club level management, which created severe conflict and put me in a very threatened position. So I'm trying to protect my livelihood, do right by my clients the whole time. So I was walking on eggshells for quite a while. Eventually, I had enough of it. I left my clientele because they were clientele that had been referred to me, generated by me. They left with me. There's no issue with that. And I started my own business because my friend John, who had opened his own gym, Evolve Strength, wanted me to come over as a contractor. That worked out really well. And my success there, a lot of other trainers followed suit in the coming years. And then getting out on my own, obviously, I'm earning more. I'm taking home more of my own pay. A friend of mine wants to start a podcast with me. We start the podcast. I start traveling to fitness industry conferences. Met a lot of really great people in the industry, from Dr. Mike Gizertel to Sohili to there's a very long list. And those two became two of our earliest guests, which of course drove a lot of attention to the early podcast, which helped that blow up when long before it feels like everybody in the industry has a podcast. And so those connections deepened along the way. I started writing for a website that my best friend just put together a website so I could write for it, because I had been reading T Nation for years and years and years, or magazines like Muscle and Fitness or Men's Health, the bodybuilding.com, the Personal Trainer Development Center. And Then we had one of the editors at T Nation, Danny Sugart, on our podcast, and Danny saw that I was writing, so she turned around and invited me to write for T Nation, which of course is a crazy dream come true, and that's over 5 years ago now. So, I'm still a regular contributor. I can't get them as much as I'd like, but I still write for them. And then that led to invitations to write for Generation Iron. And then that led to Muscle and Fitness magazine. I actually did write something for bodybuilding.com, but they were sold. I was paid, but it was never officially published. So I don't wave that writing credit around. And then eventually it led to Men's Health and some of the other things that are out there. So I have a really cool library of that stuff, but that's years and years and years of just head down, continuing to serve my clientele. I mean, I was just counting. I was just training a client who's a coach, and I have 36 client sessions booked this week on top of that. That doesn't count all my online work. That doesn't count podcast stuff or any of the social media based stuff that I do along the way. Over 4 years ago, I decided, all right, I need to have, a social media presence to complement the writing and the podcast. So I started building Instagram, and it grew gradually, gradually, gradually. And then it just grew faster and faster. So now there's, a fairly big Instagram presence that goes along with all this stuff. And then came public speaking invitations due to how much I've traveled and built relationships and showing up to support other people. And then because of my media, then people are like, hey, we want you to come and speak at this event. So that has blown up a lot. So there's a lot embedded in there. And I hope anybody listening can kind of tease out the fact that it's not, there was no moment that I kind of went, wow. I think there are personality traits and qualities that have been assets along the way. I think there's been some luck along the way. I've been in the right place at the right time. I'm a big believer in this concept called the surface area of luck, where if you put yourself in enough literal and metaphorical rooms and you expose yourself to a lot of opportunities, meanwhile, you're putting in the work to develop the skills so that way when you gain those opportunities, people recognize that you are worthy of those opportunities. You've earned them. But you have the skills and you're willing to like polish those skills to embrace those opportunities. And if you succeed at the opportunity, the first time I was given a writing thing, it went really well. That opened up more. I'm doing more and more writing, the more and more places start showing up, and the more I accumulate writing credits. I recently wrote something for, it's not published yet, so I will not announce who it is, but it's a known fitness industry publication, very solid one. And when I reached out to the editor, we've got some mutual friends, and I said, hey, I aspire to write for you, right? I didn't go in and say, hey, I got a really great story, can I get featured? I'm like, I aspire to write for you. I looked on the website, I couldn't see submission guidelines. Where's the best place to talk to you? Could I email you? And he turned around right away. He's like, oh, I would love to have you write for us. So he wanted to get on a call. We chatted. He had a ton of questions for me. He knew my reputation as a writer because of everything I'd written for. And he said in our conversation, he said, quote, you're overqualified to write for us. But that's because of what I'd already done. Now, he's still happy to have me. I've written something. He's very satisfied with it. It'll be published probably in May, and then I will officially announce what it is because I've had things fall apart at the goal line, including bodybuilding.com and other things before. So you don't count those chickens until they're hatched. But it is working very, very hard to acquire skills. The first public speaking opportunity I was given, I was a good friend of mine. I'd gone to his event 2 prior years. He had a speaker dropout. He asked me to come in. So the first thing I did is I sent a text message to my friend Luca Hosevar, and I said, hey, Luca, what books you got on public speaking, right? So he sent me a couple. I dug into those. I got help putting together like a presentation, like learn how to do like PowerPoint type stuff. And I practiced it really hard. And when I got there, it actually went really well, which there was another speaker in the lineup who has his own event. He liked me so much. He invited me to come speak at his. Word got around. And then the invitations kind of blew up because I worked really hard at studying. Behind me, people are listening to audio, but behind me on my bookshelf, there are probably 15, 18 books on writing. Because I like at any given time having one book on writing kind of going, casually to make sure this stuff is top of mind because I'm always working on the skill of writing. I know
Yeah.
that's a lot, but that's
Yeah. No, no, no,
probably
no, no.
that's a very, very roundabout way of, I think, answering the essence of that question.
No, you're 100% right. And I think the biggest thing that to take away from that is it took time. And when you talk about the generational difference of people who are from your generation versus younger ones, is that people feel more anxious because they think that they don't have time. But I think the way to properly utilize that fuel is to realize take action as if you don't have time, but be patient with the results. I know that one of my favorite people I've followed online is like Tim Grover, big into sports for most of my life, and basketball, especially him working with Kobe and Michael and Wade and all these athletes, and outside of basketball too now. And when he shared this story, I remember listening to it multiple times before Kobe Bryant died. And he's like, I'd always say to Kobe, we don't have time. We don't have time. Like, we need to act with a sense of urgency right now. And Kobe and him would be up 4 in the morning, 4:30, 5 a.m., doing shoots, whatever it was, like ice baths, you name it. And then when he passed away, he brought up the same story and he said, I always tell Kobe, we don't have time. He's like, man, I wish I was wrong. And I don't bring that up as to say, like, yes, feel more anxious, but I think that your story is a testament to when you take the action and forget about how long it's going to take, nothing will happen and then everything will happen.
Where do I want to go with this? Just a couple thoughts. I think my generation is more used to paying dues, and because that's the way things were. There were more gatekeepers. Now with the, social media can be a double-edged sword because you can platform a lot of really dubious people and information. But it is also a great platform for ethical people. So I'm not negative about social media. It's been very kind to me. I think we have a personal responsibility to be careful about kind of who we expose ourselves to. And it's harder for the consumer. So therefore, the people who complain about social media who are not doing anything active to build it and have a voice, sit down, shut up. I'm not interested in what you guys have to say because you're not part of the problem. You're just belly aching and whining. And quite frankly, if all of the grifters and charlatans and the bad guys were somehow regulated and or legislated off of the internet, which cannot and will not ever happen, it's ridiculous, then good people who need you will still not find you because you're doing nothing to draw attention to yourself and promote your skills and integrity. So guess what? Get in the arena, and it doesn't have to be social media, but put yourself out there. I mean, word of mouth locally goes a long way, sure. Now, I have a funny thing, and I'm gonna try to go do this as politely and as respectfully as possible, but I loathe Tim Grover, right? So I'm on the other edge of the spectrum.
Oh, no, please.
We're gonna have some fun here. So for context, Tim, to me, this is my opinion. First of all, he was a terrible personal trainer. He got his hands on. He was very lucky. Now, here's where he succeeds, and there's good lessons here. He was willing and fearless enough to actually approach a iconic basketball player. He was in the right place, right time. He sees the opportunity, and he started working with Michael Jordan before strength and conditioning was a common thing within basketball or most other sports. And so, I mean, I know enough about Grover's methods to know that they're not evidence-based in terms of like, for everything else he's accomplished, most people in our world understand he's not a particularly good personal trainer, which is fine. Like, that is what it is. I would argue very strongly that Tim Grover benefited far more from his relationship with Michael Jordan, which got him in the door with Dwayne Wade and Kobe Bryant, than certainly Michael benefited from, his association with Grover. Grover probably was a influential figure in terms of mindset along the way. Now, Michael was also heavily influenced by Phil Jackson and George Mumford. Now, George Mumford, whose book, The Mindful Athlete, I think, is a really good read because that George's story is really cool, had a profound influence on, and again, he also ended up, if I'm not mistaken, working with the Lakers as well because, again, of his relationship with Phil Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
And so Phil and George were powerful figures in this case. The reason why I don't like Tim is because I think he's a self-aggrandizing profiteer who trades off his association with those guys. And even the fact that he's out there talking about stories about Kobe after he died, to me, like, I find it in very poor taste. And I remember Tim Grover actually publicly ridiculing Simone Biles for her mental health struggles where she didn't go to the Olympics. She said, I can't remember what he said, but I found it actually quite offensive, and I don't find stuff offensive. So my whole thing with Grover is that, I mean, I understand he's got a couple books. Some people love them. I should read them to actually properly critique them, but I just simply just find him so distasteful that I won't even. So, I mean, I also have some goofy things with Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant is an accused sex offender, and everything, he paid off someone and everything went under the rug. And I've mellowed on my hard assery about these sort of things over the years. And even I bought and enjoyed the book. I'm trying to find it. Where
I
is
think I'm
it?
looking at
Here.
it. The Mama Mentality is the one with the gold in the middle.
The Mamba mentality. And yes, there it is right here. So I actually have it up here. So I softened up a little bit and I stopped picking those fights. So I'm going to take something good from here because I want to at least understand what was going on there. And I obviously thought it was a terrible tragedy, him and his daughter and the rest of the people on that thing. So this is sort of an interesting aspect of my personality. And maybe I'll spit it this way because there's going to be people listening going, wow, he's being an asshole and like shitting on, someone you actually really like. I think they're understanding why Tim is where he is really valuable, but I also feel that he definitely has benefited tremendously. He's very, very being self-promotional, I think is very valuable, but he's definitely benefited from trading off his association with these athletes. And he worked with Dwayne Wade and Kobe Bryant because of his relationship with Michael Jordan. And so there's that. And I tend to give Phil Jackson and George Mumford far more credit when it comes to Michael, and I'm virtually certain there's also some influence there on the Lakers as well. So yeah. Anyway, interesting conversation, and I think this is a little bit different than what you'll normally get on a podcast. So I hope people take the nuance out of that.
Oh no, for sure. And honestly, like if people don't agree with something, this isn't just the yes man podcast, right? Like if you don't agree, if you
Exactly.
have a different opinion, it's like that's okay. Like you bring up great points in that I think at least this is from what I see, right? Like you may see more things because you're far deeper in the industry, but like I was talking about this actually with my brother the other day because I saw a tweet that was like that almost summarized exactly what you said, but just in a more like specific niche way of people who are a part of like weird corners of Twitter, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And my brother and I we laughed about it because it just sounded funny like to read out loud. But then we were going back and forth, like, okay, like I don't necessarily agree with this wholeheartedly, but I do see the point that yes, Tim Grover swinging for the fences on taking a chance on Michael Jordan has been one of the most life-changing events that he's ever experienced. Period. End of story.
Mhm.
And I think that is proof to say people don't buy coaching, they buy coaches. It's more about the relationship that you develop with a coach rather than the information. Because if I'm going to be honest, like when I go online, it's like I see a lot of the same things said. Not that I disagree or I think one person's ripping off the other, but it's like who shows their personality and who do I resonate with more? When I wanted to get more into fitness and coaching, I just went online and just started following accounts. Whatever account, blue check mark, most followers, boom. That's how I came across your account. And when I started to read the stuff, I'm like, man, like, no, he's right. Like he's talking about these things and I resonate with, or John Goodman. I'm like, yeah, like I resonate with what he says, or anyone, like you name him, you name it. And then what happens is when I see you share something from someone else, it's like, oh, because I trust him, I'm going to trust them. And then if I trust her, I'm going to trust, and that's how it goes. So I think the aspect of relationship building is so crucial with what happened in Tim's career. Not to say like I don't think that like whether he's a really good personal trainer or not, like I don't know if I wouldn't say personally that I think that's necessarily indicative of like someone's true character. Like if you're not good at it compared to somebody
I
else, it's like
know, I
you
know
know,
tons of shitty personal trainers who have great relationships with their clients and they change their lives. So you're
yeah,
right. It's like it's one of those things where it's like, listen, you want to go back and look at this stuff? He's doing circus bullshit with Jordan, right? And these kind of athletes, like you get Jordan is like he's arguably the best basketball player to ever play. I mean, there's
Mhm.
obviously younger people might look at this and be like, "Oh, Kobe or Luka
LeBron.
Doncic is fucking wild." LeBron, right? Like lots of that sort of stuff. I mean, I grew up watching Jordan. I played basketball when I was in high school, so I saw what Jordan was like. And of course, there's the Last Dance, the documentary, which I didn't see at all, but stuff comes out of it. Jordan himself, if he was doing the things that now with cell phones and the way that media is versus then, he'd have been an excessively demonized figure. He was a
Sure.
very, very polarizing figure, very manipulative, a lot of like weird stuff there. And I mean, this is a guy who would play mind games with his opponents, with his teammates, could be abusive. And we love him and we're celebrating. So we also have this like weird cognitive dissonance. If we like someone, we're kind of dismissive of their failings, or if we dislike them, we tend to magnify their failings. And we're dismissive of their faults. The fitness industry is not different in that. There are people that I like that friends of mine don't like, and then there are people that some people in my world love. I happen to know things, insider things. I'm like, this person, I'm hands off from this person. I don't want to do other shit at all. I believe our industry is actually overwhelmingly filled with really awesome people, great integrity, who want the best for people. But there are definitely people who, abuse those positions in certain ways, or just very difficult people to deal with in the grand scheme of things. And I'm not interested actually policing that, despite the kind of discussion. I think it's kind of a positive one here. Him, for anybody, go read his books. Like, see if there's anything valuable in there. There's a lot of people they've sold really well. There's obviously the fact that like Jordan and Kobe didn't outright fire him right off the hop. They obviously value that relationship. There's got to be a lot of good there. Um, so you're going to get value out of exposing yourself to these things. And I think it's actually really important that you expose yourself to ideas that maybe conflict with your world view or your belief system. And sometimes you'll expose yourself to somebody's media and go, okay, this is just, I don't like this, I don't agree with this, I don't think this is very evidence-based, I think this lacks integrity, but at least you kind of know that it's out there. And then you will also, through that effort, find people that you're like, this person's integrity, ethos, knowledge base really resonates with me. And I have an incredible tribe of great people who I really like, and those people have enriched my career. I am not in the position that I'm in without the support of a lot of really incredible people,
And even
and
like,
and them being role models as well.
yes, no, 100%. And I think that I think a similar theme that kind of ties both these things together is the like is pivoting, because you didn't think about getting into fitness when you first moved to Edmonton. Like, you just worked out because like that's what you did, and you worked at a job and you moved from our hometown. And I think one of the things that I've seen, because I remember when I first like I read Tim Grover's like first book, or the second book, I guess technically, because there was like an action basketball one that I didn't really read, or it's not very popularized. And I remember reading it, and as soon as I did, I was like, then that's when his social media started to grow because he didn't have it before. And then rather than like coaching basketball players or athletes, it shifted more to like mindset coaching or helping people who are high performers. And it's like, oh, well, maybe that's actually a wheelhouse that's better suited for what you're doing versus like, I'm a personal trainer that's going to help get to the next level. It's like, and I think when you look at your story of like going there, it's like, well, you just went to the gym and you worked out and that was your thing and you were always active. And then that translated your character and your personality of working hard and paying dues translated to, oh, well, I thought it was just a job, but now this is actually a career and I'm actually very blessed to have all these things. And it's like, I never would have anticipated that. And I think that's such a hilarious truth of when we're trying to find our passion. And I hear this all the time. And of course, depending on who you follow, like Hormozy or whatever, Gary Vee, all these people say like, follow your passion. And they're like, don't follow your passion. Like, be what you're good at. Right. And it's like, yeah, you bring up show the picture of the $100 million leads. Cause it's like,
Right there.
I would subscribe to the idea that like, you don't find like your dream job or whatever. It's like, you have to do something so much to the point where you're so good at it, you basically like outwork yourself out and you're like, oh, I feel passionate about the idea of helping somebody or of uh whatever, like the action versus like I'm passionate about helping, so like being a personal trainer or being a car salesman. It's like selling is helping. That was one of the first things when I did a Good Life Fitness personal training course. Like, so it's like once that I was told that idea, I'm like, oh, it's not being a snake oil salesman. It's, do you like helping people? Okay, and you're selling. There you go.
Oh God. So you just described the sort of the counterpoints to the passion hypothesis. So there's a really great book on this, Cal Newport's So Good They Can't Ignore You. I recommend it to anybody. It's a classic.
It is a classic.
And it very much is my experience. I didn't go into this career as a passionate, early 20 something. And I think it's great if people do get in that early because you have a lot of runway to learn. But I was someone who fell into something probably out of need and maybe a little bit of desperation. And I found a great passion within the job that I had. Right. And that was the reality. It's very easy to look back and mistakenly attribute how I feel about this career now to my first few weeks and months.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do know that I developed, I felt good about what I was doing fairly early, absolutely. But I also could never have imagined the the enormity of the opportunities I would get. And I think within all this, the first 6 years, again, head down, training clients, stayed busy, working on referral business, taking good care of the clients I had, making sure they were getting results, word of mouth spread. I didn't, and I have some friends who very early on in their careers, they were good enough writers where they reached out to teenagers. My friend Lee Boyce in Toronto. Lee started writing very, very young in his early 20s. And he's been a very recognized authority in fitness for a very long time. Being in that kind of format, because T Nation is one of the traditional gatekeepers before social media really could let anybody kind of grow an account. And Lee is very well known in this industry and very well liked and respected. And I think, yet there is a generational thing where, I didn't know. I used to think, all right, I'd follow people like Jonathan Goodman or numerous other authority figures within the fitness industry, whether it's Lane Norton or Dr. Mike Isertel, or the list goes on. A lot of the T Nation writers for sure, but more. And I didn't understand how you went from, me, the trainer on the gym floor, your average, your normal trainer, even if I was, like a very busy one, to being part of that like elite quote, I don't like the lens status, but we'll call it high status community of authorities within the industry who are being published in these things and public speaking and what have you. And even as I started traveling these things, I was excited because I would listen to these people on podcasts or read their articles, and I was excited to meet some of them, and it just was really cool. I still didn't go there and go, all right, I want to be on that stage one day. That was never a thought. In fact, I tried to turn down my first public speaking invitation and suggest that my friend Tim ask other people that, he's like, no, I want you. And then that was it. And then that just blew it up. So I did not believe that any of this stuff was even possible. It just, over time and patience, the opportunities came along. And then I started to embrace them very aggressively once they came along. I think that's the thing. And, kind of going back to Grover, one of the things that Tim Grover has done very, very well is he's fearlessly pursued. He's a bulldog when it comes to personal brand development, which I agree with. Hormozy talks a lot about this too. I think one of the most valuable things you can do is to develop a personal brand, to develop authority, to develop credibility. And who you have coached is part of that, which is true of Grover.
Mm-hmm.
Having written books can go a long way towards authority, and that is
Mm-hmm.
also true of Grover. So there are a ton of great lessons within that, right? There's other stuff that I don't like. I don't like David Goggins, and I don't like you can't hurt me, because I think that's epic dumb fuckery and a great example of survivorship bias. And anybody else would go and try to do what Goggins did, and they would just absolutely die. But I also think there's great lessons within that. If you're in the gym and you're working through a set and the reps are getting uncomfortable, I can literally challenge this and go, listen, this man wrote, untrained and not knowing what the hell he was doing, ran an ultra marathon on like broken tibias, I think it was,
Yeah.
and just other like just the stuff he did to his body. He's very lucky he's alive. And it's also a really impressive story of everything. So if he can do crap like that and dig down to a place that just put himself through inhuman stuff, then you can train a bit harder and you can stick around instead of going, oh, I don't have the energy today. You can go, I can go hit the gym. I can go train pretty hard today. I can tolerate some discomfort. I can, not give in to this like craving of this mediocre junk food that I'm craving on impulse because wasn't, I didn't plan ahead and have meals, or I don't want to sit down and eat the chicken and rice that I cooked. Not that that's how you have to eat to get healthy at all. It's just metaphorically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And we can tolerate, in fact, we should get better at tolerating some discomfort, some delayed gratification, and put ourselves in uncomfortable positions. Michael Easter's book, The Comfort Crisis, talks a lot about this, the modern issue that our society has with we just are so not willing to endure any sort of discomfort that it's hurting us physically, right? And we're metabolically and emotionally very unhealthy as a society. And this is quite quantifiable now too. And we see it all around us all the time. So I think we have to get back in touch with that sort of stuff. And I think we have to be willing to endure we have to be patient. We have to be willing to endure some hardship. So if we go to like, this fitness professional listening, because I'm sure there's enthusiasts, and I really hope this stuff translates to you guys as well. You get the quote young person will say, who's in a big hurry to grow a very large social media following, right? You got a trainer maybe the first couple of years of their career and wants all of a sudden, well, oh, I want to hit like 100,000 followers and I want to blow up all this sort of stuff. Listen, I didn't even think about social media until year, God, almost year 9 of my career. Now, I was very active with posting on Facebook and serving my audience, which I think is one of the smartest things you can do. But in terms of like trying to grow a larger following, I didn't even think about that. You know, my first time I wrote for any publication, it was by invitation. I'd written for my own website and had very humble ambitions with that. And I was probably what, 8 years into my career at that point. The podcast started in year 7. I was just focused on being of service and learning and paying my bills and being able to stay in an industry that I really felt fulfilled by. Now, it would be a mistake to say that everybody needs to do that because that's gatekeeping. The world has changed. We now have access to options and opportunities that younger, newer coaches should embrace. And I think social media is a great one. I would encourage anybody to, quite early in your career, start an email list. Even like before you may really get the leverage out of it, start an email list, collect the emails, have every client's email, find ways to send them valuable information. Start writing, learn the skill of writing. And maybe it's starting your own website. Maybe it's more focused on social media captions. Although I do think that long form writing that is searchable on a website is still a really great idea. Maybe it is starting a podcast, and maybe it's serving the audience that you have, your clientele. And over time, you'll get great guests and develop relationships and learn more about the skill of it. Maybe YouTube, maybe you're really good at video-based formatting stuff and you're savvy about the video, short form social media based video. And you're putting it on Instagram, you're putting it on TikTok, and you're putting it on YouTube Shorts. Really smart play. But then maybe you also lead into more of a little bit more of that long form. So you're posting to YouTube, and everybody who's got a big YouTube, whether it's your Jeff Nippards or your Athlean X, or I mean, right now Renaissance Periodization's YouTube is exploding. They're at 1.5 million followers and gaining over 100,000 followers a month. It's astonishing. They're great friends of mine. They're wonderful people and a great resource. But all that stuff had humble beginnings, right? Every single one of the authorities in the industry that we know started out with a minimal social media following that they nurtured over time. And then at some point, there was some sort of inflection that helped them grow. They wrote their first article that no one read. They had the first YouTube video that you go back and you watch. And it's like, holy shit, that's embarrassing. Like Jordan Saya will tell you how bad his early any long form media is. But Jordan Saya did a ton of it for a very long time. And now he's one of the more respected authorities with a massive social media following who does very well for himself.
Mm-hmm.
So I want people to temper the rush that they're in and have a realistic idea of putting the time and effort into building the skills. If you build the skills, and this is true of fitness and nutrition as well. It's the same thing as like someone comes in and they're 50 pounds overweight and it took them 10 years to gain that. It's like, hey, I want to lose it all in 6 months. Probably not super realistic.
Yeah.
So you go in day to day, you do the fundamentals really well. You delay the gratification. As much as it sounds cliche and it risks be a little bit gatekeepy, you pay your dues. Because if you go through the patience and the willingness to delay gratification and trust the process of paying your dues in any situation, then it's going to forge some character that's going to help you. Because if it's easy and you get crazy results quick, you get the coach who comes in the industry after 3 months, is really clever with video, blows up a little bit on social media, all of a sudden has a bigger following. Well, first of all, anybody experienced is going to be able to see through the fact that this person doesn't have much experience and they don't know what they're talking about. But, you know, I think the expectation that you can be that famous, have like vanity metrics on social media up that because 100,000 followers does not guarantee any sort of real business, especially if someone's 3 to 6 months in. So there's the trappings of status without necessarily having like built the foundations that will lead to a successful career. I think people should need to focus on the foundations of a successful career. Those foundations will make it a lot easier to create short and long form media that is based upon experience, working with real people, that will be helpful to more people. And over time, you'll accumulate the experience in both helping people knowledge base, but also you'll get really good at the media side of stuff and they can grow together. So I would encourage any coach to get in on these things much earlier than I did. You have the opportunity now where I didn't know how to do this stuff. I'm very grateful for the opportunities I've gotten, and I have no complaints about the timeline that I was able to do it on. In fact, one of my clients yesterday asked me, he's a young guy, really smart. And sometimes people ask me this question, if you could go back and talk to your like younger self, what advice would you give? And my answer is always that I wouldn't, right? It's metaphorically, my cat Ozzy's made an appearance. He's struggling now. My answer is always I wouldn't, because it's always the butterfly effect. If anybody remembers the Ashton Kutcher movie, which is getting quite old now, I'm dating myself, which is ridiculous.
I've not seen it, but I can imagine it's not from within the last 5 years if it's Ashton Kutcher.
I think it's probably like 15 to 18 years old now. It's quite a dark movie when you get into it. It's quite horrifying. But the premise of the butterfly effect, I think most people intuitively get, is you go back in time and you change something. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, that's a Back to the Future poster right behind your head, right? Yeah, exactly. So it's very
Correct.
much a premise embedded within it. It's like, don't don't do anything, don't interact with stuff. So if anybody knows the Back to the Future series, which is much older again, right? So they're classics. Michael J. Fox from Edmonton, where I am, you will understand that if I were to go back and change some of the worst things that have ever happened to me or bad decisions I made, it would fundamentally change who I am. I'd be at a different place and I wouldn't have been where I needed to be to benefit from all the other things that happened. So because I've had a good outcome, I wouldn't actually go and change anything, right? Which, of course, doesn't answer the, well, if you could, like, what theoretical advice would you give to, someone else? Okay, giving to another young coach, like I said, is get started on these things earlier. Start the email list sooner. Start writing sooner. Start building your media sooner. All of those things. Okay, Oz, you can't stand in front of the camera, buddy. Come on, move your butt. Good boy. So just start these things sooner. They're all good things to do. Just I wouldn't change my timeline, is my answer.
No, it's so funny you mentioned that exact question because like that's usually the question I ask, like the last question I ask people, like what advice did you give your younger self? But honestly, that's kind of a perfect answer because I used to think like, well, do you regret what you've done or wish you would have done different? Well, if you're happy with where you are right now, then the answer would be no, because you wouldn't be where you are without having gone through all the things you went through in the first place.
There's a literal, serious, but also comedic generalized answer that usually comes up for this. And the thing is, don't date that girl. Okay. So we all have one of those. I won't get into specifics, but sometimes they can cause you a bit of grief. But
Yeah.
that being said, no, I'm very fulfilled with life and the outcome. I have a great life. And there's always, things we'd like to do more of. And I'm a bit too much of a workaholic, so I need to take more time to do like personal stuff with friends and whatnot. But nope, that's the answer to that question.
Well, I thought it was hilarious that you mentioned the David Goggins thing because like his book when I first read it, like literally plowed through it in 2 days. And it was just at the edge of when I first started reading self-improvement books because as a kid you're conditioned like reading is a punishment, you have to be silent, and I was like this is
Mm.
terrible. And then as I got older and I read these books, I'm like oh my goodness, like I actually love reading. It's just when you get to choose what you read, that's where the real fun is, that's where the magic happens, not read Catcher in the Rye because I said so, or you know all,
Yeah, to kill a mockingbird or all these other sort of things, or the what is it, the God, Lord of the Flies, right? The stuff
yeah,
you
Lord of the Flies, exactly, especially for Canadians
here's
listening, they'll
here's something that's really worth understanding. You're always going to be more influenced by the earliest books that you read in that sort of genre, because there's a lot of overlapping ideas between some of these things. So, the earliest books that I read, and when I really, because I read a lot of books now, those are more influential because they were just my first exposure to some of these fundamental ideas. And so for you, like reading something like Can't Hurt Me and plus it's great storytelling. I'll give you a really good example of I love, it's a long running joke. If anybody listens to my older episodes of the podcast, I love shitting on The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. I actually think it's a terrible book. I think it's trash. But Mark Manson is actually an excellent storyteller. He's a very good writer. I just think the whole premise of the book is bullshit.
what about the movie?
The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. I didn't even know there was a movie.
Oh well, that could be another episode of talking about why no one cares about you and they care about your niche because he
Yeah.
created a movie that basically flopped because nobody cared about him.
Mm.
It's they care about the story. So continue.
Right. So story is at the heart of everything, right? You have a really great story. Now, there's also something else too, is like there's a difference between story and storytelling and your story. And what a lot of coaches make the mistake of thinking, especially when it comes to social media, is that you think anybody gives a shit about your story. And this is a quote from my editor at Men's Health, Ed Samuel, because of course, guess what? They get constant messages saying, "Hey, how do I get featured in Men's Health? I got a really great story." And Eb's like, his general answer is no one gives a shit about your story. He's right. The only reason why we care about people's stories like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Elon Musk or Beyonce or whoever else is because they're successful by some standard of what we think about business success or celebrity or fame or accomplishment or what have you.
Mhm.
So we're interested in those stories because we know who those people are, right? But the relatively speaking unknown individual who is looking to get featured in Men's Health because they think that's going to blow the doors open on their career, I promise you it won't. Uh, the general person not interested in your story at all. You have to go at this through a different lens and go, how can I give people something that is valuable to them, that is helpful and supportive to them, and it's not beneficial to you? How do I go to an editor or any sort of quote gatekeeper, because they do exist and for good reasons, who might create an opportunity for you in your career? Well, how are you of service? That's something that's valuable to that person. And again, we go in thinking, oh, I got a really great story. It'll benefit everybody. Bullshit. Absolutely bullshit. No one cares about that story. You have to find another way to provide something that's really valuable and helpful to that person. And because those gatekeepers, they have a limited amount of opportunities that they can create for someone to appear on a podcast or speak on your stage or to be featured in a publication. So guess what? They have to make sure that they're serving their audience because they have a job as well. And if they don't do a good job of putting butts in seats and eyes on pages, then they won't have a job anymore, right? Or
Yeah.
what, or a podcast or what have you. So go in however you possibly can to be of service to other people and not look at it as how can I benefit from this, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's when from the books about writing that I've and just people I follow on social media, they talk about it. It's like a basic concept. Like I'm sure maybe you've heard of the book called Sell Like Crazy, or maybe you've seen the cover, or maybe not. I never heard of it,
Not
but
sure. There's a lot of those books like that. I've read a lot of sales books, but that one I'm not familiar with. No.
it was written by this author named Sabri Subi. He's from Australia. He's like an Australian entrepreneur, and my brother originally told me, he's like, you got to read this book, and I was like, okay, sure, whatever. He's like, it's that you just pay $2 for shipping and he'll send it to you. I was like, whatever, $2. If it flops, I lost $2. I don't care. And I read like 80 pages, and it was just almost story and just the classic, like mother came from nothing, blah blah blah. And you're just like, yeah, like you're like, I don't care. I don't care. Like it doesn't mean anything to me. So I put the book down for many months. And then I started working a good life. And I was like, I want to build my own training business, blah, blah, blah. How can I sell? Like, how can I? The second I flipped the page from where I was, all of a sudden, just the words started pouring. I just started reading like no tomorrow, flipping through pages, flipping, because I didn't care who wrote it. The principle stood the test of time.
Mm.
Create high value content offer, speak to one person, solve a specific problem for a specific person. Boom. Doesn't matter who you talk to. Doesn't matter if it's a book from 100 years ago or last week or whatever. Person from Money Twitter, Dale Carnegie. It doesn't matter. The principle of how it could help me is
Mm.
what mattered. And for most people, it doesn't matter. You don't know who Sabri Subri is. It doesn't matter. But if I told you, yeah, Andrew, if you solve a specific problem for a specific person, that's how you grow a business. Boom. It's no secret. It's not a big secret. And I think that's the thing that's so amazing about what you share with regards to why your story doesn't matter. It's how you can help people. It's like that's marketing 101.
There's
It's
sort of an
not.
irony in all this too, because what do we do? We started out here with my story. You asked about it, but what I do hope in the grand scheme of this conversation, because I'm out of time, is anybody listening took a lot of valuable stuff, whether it's career based or just life success based stuff. If anybody has deeper questions about any of these sort of things, you're always welcome to message me on social media. I respond to every message on Instagram. I'm usually pretty prompt with that. And Matthias, I just really appreciate you having me on here. Thank you. And I could tell from your energy and personality, you're a go-getter, and I can see why, books about go-getters would resonate with you. And I have little doubt that you became very confident with sales and selling yourself, which is really about being service and showing people how you can help them, and that you've done very well for yourself. That radiates through your engagement here. So thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, Andrew, thank you for being on. It was a great pleasure. And everyone, make sure if you have questions or if you want the best fitness content, or some of the best fitness content, because there's more amounts than you believe. Go follow Andrew at Andrew Coates Fitness on Instagram, and you will get all the information you're looking for.